At this point, I've studied and stayed in A-frames, domes, even shipping containers, but tiny homes are still one of the most popular and one of the most approachable Airbnbs that you can own. They're great because they don't require a ton of space. They could even fit in your backyard. They cost less to build than a normal house, and they still rent out quite well. But are they really as good of an investment as they seem? I talked to Darren, the owner of 2 different tiny house villages in Arizona, about the whole operation to find out, are tiny houses still a good idea for Airbnb in 2022? But before we really get into it, I wanted to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Republic. Republic is a global private investing platform. Republic makes it possible for everyone to invest in private companies that were typically not accessible to most investors. Anything from real estate, startups, crypto projects, art, they've got it all on here. So historically, only high net worth individuals and large institutional investment firms, in most cases, could invest in startups and gain the outsized returns. Retail investors have been left out of this for decades, but Republic is changing that and bringing access to everyone. The opportunities on Republic have been carefully vetted. They have a team of investment professionals who work to curate private investment opportunities with high growth potential. They accept quality deals that are already backed by venture capitalists, and actually only 5% of the companies that apply to raise on Republic are accepted. You can invest with as little as $100. They get all of the deal information in one place, so you can see the SEC documents, the pitch decks, and more. Of course, there is risk with any investment and with investing in startups, but make sure you're doing all your due diligence and always only invest what you can afford to lose. And if you guys want to get started investing on Republic, you can actually get $100 with your first investment when you use my code. So I'll have it on the screen and I'll have the link down below to go check it out. And thank you to Republic for sponsoring. Now let's get into the tiny house. For today's episode, we've made it all the way to Sedona, Arizona. Sedona is kind of a funky little city. It's geographically so beautiful, and it's very spiritual. It's kind of the perfect place for unconventional lodging, like a tiny house.
I actually lived on a houseboat in Sausalito, California, and it had a real sense of community. And I wanted to build that on land. So that's where the whole idea of tiny house villages came from.
The 2 villages are pretty different. The Sedona location features 4 tiny cabins nestled into a canyon.
One is more rustic, and that's where we are right now in Oak Creek Canyon, just north of Sedona, in this beautiful natural environment with the red rocks. And our second location is more communal, more like a pocket neighborhood. It's in a downtown, it's walkable, and it's in Cottonwood, Arizona, which is kind of an emerging wine growing region, about 15 minutes from Sedona.
The Cottonwood location was the first one that I stayed at. It's a relatively small piece of land, maybe half an acre, that is able to squeeze in 4 tiny homes. This is the tiny cabin that I stayed in. It's called the Wonder Cabin. It has pretty high ceilings for a tiny house. To the right, you've got a queen bed, staged kind of like a day bed for the daytime. Across the way, you've got a pretty generous sized kitchen for a tiny house. This takes up most of the living space, and it's actually a pretty decent sized kitchen with space to cook, chop things, and eat at the bar stools. The bathroom is at the very end, and it honestly does not feel tiny at all. It feels like a completely normal sized bathroom. This whole tiny house has lots of rustic details like this rope and reclaimed wood.
Some of our earlier tiny homes are more like cabin-y feel inside, but as they were designed by Jay Schaefer, they're also kind of arts and crafts, or the craftsman style. I actually had a craftsman house in the past. It was like one of those Sears kit houses. The early tiny homes, like the one behind us, Grow, closely resemble that sort of craftsman cabin.
And actually my favorite thing about this cabin is around the back is this amazing outdoor shower that's wrapped around a tree. How cool is this? All of the cabins look like some variation of this one. This is a look inside of the various cabins from both the Cottonwood and the Sedona location. And then outside the cabins is a common space nestled into some trees.
I'm a landscape architect, so the decks, the landscaping, how everything in a building fits into the site, to me, is critically important.
Okay, let's talk about what the costs were like for the Sedona location.
So this is the more remote location. We're down in a canyon. When you look up, you see this amazing view of the mountain. This seemed like such a prime plot of land, so I figured it must have been pretty expensive. The tiny homes here look pretty similar, but the main difference is they've got that lofted bed, so they have more of that classic tiny home feel.
The total cost for the tiny homes, including the land and all the improvements, are probably between $150,000 and $180,000 each. So the properties up here in Oak Creek Canyon were between $100,000 and $150,000 in total.
I also want to note that this land was purchased back in 2015, so it would be a lot more expensive now.
And the cost of construction was quite a bit less back then. Tiny homes are expensive to build because you have the kitchens, the bathrooms, you have everything's in a small package. So, a tiny home is really like $300 a square foot to build. And you're seeing tiny homes online right now for sale for, $150,000 plus. The tiny homes generally can start as low as $70,000 and up to $150,000. But on top of that, these are put on permanent foundations. Those cost about $6,000 each. And then we had grading and retaining walls and decking. And I would say that, a lot of the landscaping and the decking, because they're elevated, might have been $15,000 to $20,000 for each tiny home. We also have a lot of outdoor amenities, large patios, and then we have hot tubs and fire pits as well. And that kind of added to the cost for the outdoor amenities.
Another fairly large expense he had was hooking up utilities.
So the utilities actually cost more than the land itself. So this is solid rock. We had the jackhammer every foot, and it was about $150,000 just in utility improvements. So we had to bring in all the infrastructure. So one thing we're lucky here, because I mentioned these lots are very small, there's not enough room here to have like a well and a septic system on the same lot. But we have a small district utility at the bottom of the hill. So we have our own water system and our own mini sewage treatment plant. So that's the only way we were able to get these small lots with the tiny homes on them in the first place. We also had to bring in the power, which is a new requirement, as opposed to overhead. We're trying to put everything underground. And then the internet and cable as well. I would recommend people when they're looking to buy land to check out the infrastructure that's available and what it might cost, and then maybe even get a bid before they buy the land, because this was more expensive than we thought.
So the tiny house, not including the land, and on a fixed foundation will probably be around $100,000. And Darren did something really interesting with the Cottonwood location that allowed him to build multiple tiny homes. He found an oddly shaped piece of property that he could rezone. So you can see this piece of land, it's like a weird triangle shape. It would be kind of hard to fit a single family home here. So he was able to zone this into a commercial lot, allowing him to put multiple structures on it, not just one.
So since it's zoned commercially, this is actually technically not a short-term rental Airbnb, but rather it's a hotel, so it abides by different county rules.
You see, short-term rentals have a lot of regulations. Some cities ban them altogether, and some places, like in Palm Springs, will limit the amount of nights you can rent out. But hotels aren't really restricted as to the number of nights you can rent out or the amount of units you can rent.
This is a great business model if you can achieve it, but it's not exactly simple to pull this off.
So the rezoning process actually took a year. We talked to all the neighbors were all good with what we were doing. It just takes a time. You have to have a public notice, you have to put a sign on the property, you have to have a public meeting, you have to have a reading, and then a 60-day kind of comment period. So that really actually stretched out to be an entire year. But we were actually working on building the units at the same time.
The Cottonwood piece of land cost $206,000 including utilities, and it was another $85,000 for tree removal and landscaping. So I'm sure you're wondering how they rent out. And these tiny houses actually rent out really well. As you can see in November, they're almost completely sold out. They really don't have a lot of availability. They start at $250 a night, and at 8 total units, if it was just 50% occupied, that would still be $30,000 a month in revenue. This is an amazing return, but remember, this is 8 tiny houses. This did not happen overnight.
What advice would I have for people that haven't built anything like this before? I would say definitely start small and start with a pilot project or something to get your feet wet on, get to know your building trades, or if you're doing prefab, get to know your builder or your offsite builder. And then once you get that first small project or accessory dwelling unit, under your belt, then go for the larger project, whether that's multiple units like a tiny house village, or whether you build the small ADU first and then you build the house after. There are lots of things that you will learn from the process building the smaller unit that'll help you in the second phase of the project.
So is it worth it to build a tiny house for Airbnb in 2022? Yes and no. Yes, in that they have that unique factor and they're still really booked out. But I don't think it's a good idea if you have an expensive piece of land. You see, land is expensive now, and if you buy a plot that costs, say, $400,000 and you're only zoned to build one structure, it doesn't make a ton of sense to build something so small. But if you can rezone it to allow multiple tiny homes, or if you can fit one in your backyard or something like that, then I think it's super worth it. Yes, tiny homes have been a trend for a while, but I don't think they're going anywhere. I think people still really like them. I think they actually are a really good little vacation in a recession. They're less expensive than a lot of Airbnbs, but they still are aesthetically really cool, and people want to stay in them. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about the tiny camp in Sedona. Give this video a like if you liked it, and check out my other checked-in episodes we've done. We've done financial breakdowns of tree houses and A-frames. Check those out if you're interested, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!